Surah in the Quran that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions would always recite to one another. Whenever they gathered for a meeting, they would not depart that meeting before at least one of them had recited this surah. And it is this very same surah, this same chapter, that Imam al-Shafi'i, he said of it, he said that if this was the only chapter, if this was the only surah that we had from the Quran, it would have been sufficient for us. It would have been sufficient for humanity. What surah could this possibly be? What surah could be distinguished with this status? It's not Surah Al-Fatiha, not Surah Al-Baqarah, but a much shorter surah. In fact, this is one of the shortest chapters in the Quran. A couple of ayat, and ultimately, it is no longer than a single sentence. The entire chapter is a single sentence. What is this surah? وَالْعَصْرِ وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. By the declining day, truly man is in a state of loss, except for those who believe and do righteous deeds, and who advise each other to truth and to patience. So it is Surah Al-Asr. This was the surah that the companions would always recite to one another. And why this surah specifically? Why this chapter? What is so significant about it? What is it even about? Well, to answer that question, we just simply look at the very first ayah, the very first verse, at the name of the surah. Wal Asr. What is Asr? It does, of course, refer to a certain time during the day. That's when we pray the Asr prayer. But it has several roots. It has several origins. It comes in part from the word asara, which means squeeze. You know, when you squeeze the juice out of an orange or out of some other fruit, something's being squeezed. It also comes from the word for asar, a strong, powerful wind or storm that destroys everything in its path. So here we have a word that at once is referring to something being squeezed and something being ravaged by this powerful, unstoppable storm. And what is being referred to here? Time itself. Because what is time but something that squeezes us, squeezes the life out of us, something that destroys everything in its path, and something that cannot be stopped. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, that truly man is in a state of loss, what kind of loss is he talking about? Loss. All sorts of loss. All kinds of loss. And one of the most profound states of loss that we are in is the loss of time. All the time that we waste, all the time that we are always losing, day in and day out. And the fact that we are always losing this time, it makes us very, very scared. We're very deeply afraid of the loss of time. The idea that one day my parents, one day my siblings, one day my children won't be here. One day I won't be here. One day my heart will stop beating. My lungs will stop breathing. My blood will stop flowing. One day this will happen. This is terrifying to us. The fact that this story ends, that is terrifying to us. So we are afraid of the loss of time. And we find all sorts of ways to combat this fear, to keep this terrible dread at bay. There's an anthropologist named Ernest Becker. In 1973, he published a very interesting book. The book was titled The Denial of Death. The Denial of Death. And in this book, he explained a theory that he had, which is that all of us, since we are so scared of death, since we are so scared of the ending, what we do is we try to keep ourselves alive forever in other ways. And he called these immortality projects. Immortality projects. Things that we do to transcend death, to keep ourselves alive forever. Right? Because that's what we want ultimately. That's what we're chasing. We're chasing forever. We're chasing eternity. We don't just want to be wealthy. We want to be wealthy forever. We don't just want to be happy. We want to be happy forever. So we don't want this to end. So we do these immortality projects. So sure, maybe someday I'll stop breathing, but at least I'll write a great novel, a great book that people will be reading 100, 200, 1,000 years from now, so they'll still talk about me. Sure, one day my body will be underground, rotting away, but at least I can start a company or an organization that in 100 years or 1,000 years will still be around, and it'll be named after me, so people will still remember my name. So sure, I might be dead, but at least I'll stay alive forever in the history books. What we want for ourselves is what we see when, for example, we visit the pyramids, the great pyramids in Egypt. These monumental structures built more than 5,000 years ago, and we stare at them and we're amazed by them, and we say, wow, I wish I could leave something like that behind, so that in another 5,000 years, someone else will visit something that I made or read something that I left behind, and so they'll remember me, they'll still admire me. So somehow, in some way, I will still be around. I will be immortal. But of course, the sad truth is that one day the pages of the history books will fade and crumble away. And one day those great pyramids will sink into the very sand that they stand on. Because if something has a beginning, then it will surely have an end. And the universe itself had a beginning, so it will have an end. And you don't have to be a Muslim to accept this. You ask any astronomer or astrophysicist or scientist, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to the earth, to the universe in the future? And they'll tell you, oh, well, one day the sun will expand and it will burn everything on the surface of the earth to a crisp. Then it will consume the earth. And one day the nuclear reactions that power the stars will run out. And so the stars will turn off, like you're turning off a light switch. And the stars will die out, and that will be that, and everything will end. So they'll tell you this. Some people, when they think about this and they really accept this, that it's true, everything is going to go away someday. What do? They say, well, okay, if everything ends, then let me do what I want. Let me live the life that I want. I'll do what I want. I'll see what I want, I'll drink what I want, I'll eat what I want, I'll live however I like. It all ends anyway, right? So whatever. So they throw themselves into their desires. And of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us of this people. Have you seen those who took their whims as their Lord? And their whims, truly it is hawa, it is wind, a passing wind. It's strong while it's there, but then in a moment it's going to be gone as if it was never there. And so they give themselves over to their desires, and they think this will give them satisfaction and meaning. But eventually that too fades away. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in no uncertain terms in the Quran, أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانِ أَن يُتْرَكَ سُدًى. Does the human being really think, does he really think that he's going to be left without purpose, without reason? That's just going to be left to meander, aimless, wandering for all his life? And the word used here, suda, it's actually the word that was used to refer to an untethered camel. Right? So you can imagine a camel, it's not tethered to anything, it's free. Right? Go, roam the world. A camel free to roam the desert. Maybe it has a water pouch, it has no rider, it can live however it likes, and it could run and walk for however long it likes, but eventually it will tire, eventually the water will run out, and eventually it will collapse and it will pass away. Just another speck in a giant desert, and that is that. So that doesn't give us a solution. That doesn't give us a solution either. And so truly we are indeed in a state of loss. And we will not find our salvation in these various immortality projects. And the truth is, we have a very twisted conception of what success looks like, of what a life well lived looks like. Right? What does a good successful life look like? If we want to be remembered, if we want people to remember us forever, then know that it is in our nature that we will forget. Right? The vast majority of human beings will be forgotten. And again, what even is the word for human that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in Surah Al-Asr? Insan. Right? And what is the insan? The insan is the one who forgets. Because the word for insan is nasi, is forgetfulness. So we will forget. We will forget each other. Right? Most of us will be forgotten. A few will make it to the history books, and eventually those will be forgotten as well. But who doesn't forget? Who doesn't forget? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the only one who is eternal and unforgetting. He will not forget you. And so we find that many of the most successful people in human history, actually, we don't know who they were. We don't know their names. We read about them in the Quran. Whether it's the people of the cave who remain nameless, or people whose names we know, like Al-Khidr, but whom we know nothing about. And here they are in the Quran, the words of Allah immortalized forever. Forgotten to history, but not forgotten to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So those are the ones, those people, those obscure commoners that no one remembers, Allah remembers them. Because they lived their life the way it should be lived. So they attained that eternity, that immortality that so many of us do and continue to chase our lives away, chasing after. We want to be remembered. Well, no one will truly remember us the way we want except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول لكم هذا واستغفر الله. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam thumma ma ba'd. Brothers and sisters in Islam, we talked about a few meanings of the word asr, that it comes from several words, meaning squeezed, meaning something that's being squeezed, or meaning a strong, powerful storm that cannot be stopped. And of course, we also know that asr refers to a time of the day. Right? In the late afternoon, shortly before sunset, that's when we pray Salat al-Asr. And this time period before Maghrib, this time of Asr, it is a very short time. It's a fleeting time. And this is actually a very important reminder for us as well. That just like the period of Asr, our own lives are very short. They're very fleeting. They make up a very, very tiny percentage of the rest of the day. There is much more time outside of the time of Asr. And sometimes we forget this. That there is much more time outside of the few decades, if we are fortunate, that we will have here, that we will have now. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in no uncertain terms that humanity, all of us, believers and non-believers alike, we are in a state of loss. Innal insana lafi khusr. We are in a state of loss. In many types of loss. And the most profound of those losses is the loss of time. Except for who? Except for who? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Except for those who believe and do righteous deeds and who advise each other to truth, who advise each other to patience. So except for those who remember where they are and remember what's coming, and who help other people around them remember that as well. That, brothers and sisters, is really the only true immortality project. More than writing a great book or starting a great organization or doing whatever it may be, that is the true immortality project. And ultimately what really matters are indeed the deeds that we do, the deeds between us and Allah and the deeds between us and other people. This is where the idea of a sadaqah jariyah comes from, right? A running charity. A charity that will last beyond you, even after you die. And it's not possible to have that running charity unless you are involved in and engaged with the people around you, helping the community around you. A community that is together on the right path. So the fact that everything ends, the fact that someday the earth will burn up and the stars will go out and we will be resurrected, this should give us some comfort. Because we have so many people today who torture themselves, who drive themselves into depression and misery because they exist in a state of constant anxiety. They're always worried, they're always anxious. And what are they anxious about? What are they worried about? Well, they're worried about all the successful people and friends that they see on social media, all the people who are changing the world, all the people who are ahead of them in life. Oh, look, he's already married. She already has children. He's already promoted at his company. She's already finishing her PhD. They're going out there. They're changing the world. They're leaving an impact. And I can't compare to them. And if I can't change the world, if I can't leave that sort of impact, then what's the point of my life anyway? What's the point of anything? You have so many people who actually think this way, whether they realize it or not. And accepting that ultimately there's something greater than that, it doesn't mean that you don't try to do your best at whatever it is you're doing, right? So if you're a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher or a journalist or a technician or an electrician or a plumber or an athlete, whatever you might be, well, be the best that you can be, right? Because there's also an aspect of our deen, right? Itqan al-amal, perfecting our works. So be the best that you can be, but never forget what really matters. Do not try to find your ultimate meaning, your ultimate salvation in your career, in your job, in your personal passion projects. You cannot find ultimate meaning, ultimate peace in these things. Because again, everything will fade away, and we will always be tortured by the fact that everything ends, that everything fades away. And the only one who doesn't fade away is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we keep that in mind, when we keep the real immortality project in mind, then we will be able to attain a measure of peace in this world and in the next. Then maybe, just maybe, we'll be a little less in the state of loss, in this khusf that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of in Surah Al-Asr. So I ask Allah to make us from those who believe, who do righteous deeds, and who advise each other to truth, and who advise each other to patience. اللهم ادخلنا جنات ونجنا من النار اللهم ادخلنا جنات ونجنا من النار اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا واسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك قريب مجيب الدعوات عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله يذكركم وذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
استوى